Welcome to Common Sense. The Common Sense program is a series of shows featuring interviews with very interesting people. So that will help us learn in a clear, concise, and direct way who these folks are, what they do, and what makes sense to them and what doesn't. I'm Rudy Breglia, and today I'll be interviewing the brave, highly decorated, including a Bronze Star, 20-year combat veteran with 117 missions, retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Marcell Strbich, and now candidate for Ohio's Secretary of State. Marcell, thanks for your service.
Thank you.
Welcome to Common Sense. Please start us off. Let us know where you were born, where you've lived, what brings you to this part of Ohio.
Absolutely. I'm a Midwest kid. I'm born and raised in Chicago.
Okay.
Family came from Europe in 1970. Family settled in the north side of Chicago, so Cubs fan originally.
Okay.
And worked in the family business. All three of us, children, grew up in that environment. So
Wonderful.
I've gotten to be exposed to everybody from different areas of a big city, which has helped me a lot in life, especially made me service-oriented.
Okay. Why did you choose a military career? Did you have a role model?
Well, I think we all have role models, and I didn't happen to have a father who was in Vietnam or World War II, but I grew up around people who had served in Vietnam, and I was drawn to that in part because where my family came from in Croatia, there was a war in the 1990s.
Wow.
And I was there in that country at that time.
Wow.
And I got to experience that at a very young age, what that's like and what, patriotism is, because you really learn patriotism when your country's and your people are under attack.
Right,
and,
right.
and people get that. So I think that was something that happened in my formative years.
Tell us about your 20-year military career in the Air Force.
Well, first of all, it was a distinction and honor of my life to serve that. I never thought I'd serve 20 years. 4 years, and that's usually what a lot of people serve.
Right.
But I liked it, and there was a need. Country was facing issues after 9/11, as you know.
Understand.
And then a lot of people had fear and anxiety over the issues of being potentially attacked. So I was moved to want to step in, fill that void. And immediately they put me to good use in terms of sending me to the Middle East. And I really liked the idea of the camaraderie of the armed forces, the profession of arms. And the country has been able to lean on its people at key times in our history. And so I wanted to be a part of that. And I believed it was giving back because my parents came from a system of communism and so on. And I looked at it like it's very important that those of us embrace those values in this country to ensure the defense of liberty, not just in the United States, but abroad. And I did that. I served multiple tours, 5 tours total in Iraq and Afghanistan. I even served in Africa. And that was some of the best assignments that I could think of.
Okay. What was your last military assignment, and what were your primary duties?
Yeah, so I worked at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I've been assigned there twice out of Dayton, Ohio, and I was assigned in the area of Air Force Material Command, which is our major headquarters for acquisition for all weapon systems in the Air Force is there. 90,000 is the size of that group. Well, I served as the intelligence acquisitions to intelligence support, and my area of focus was supply chain. And as you know, after COVID, our supply chain in the United States faced a lot of shortages and shortfalls and questions about our components being foreign supplied, and that adds a degree of vulnerability. So that assignment played a role in shaping my understanding of what is, vulnerable and how we should protect it.
Okay. What are the primary duties of a Secretary of State?
Well, Secretary of State's 2 main primary duties are election and business services administration. On the business services side, a Secretary of State's responsibility includes licensing and incorporating businesses in Ohio, of which 100,000 or so were incorporated and licensed in the last year. The election administration, well, we all understand that role in that when we go and we vote on election day or we request an absentee ballot. So the Secretary of State provides a level of oversight for 88 different county board of elections and ensures that the exercise of democracy in Ohio and across our country is made possible.
What experience prepared you to be Secretary of State?
Really every experience. When you're in the military, you work in peace and wartime. I've had a lot of organizational leadership experience. I've worked at the command level.
Yeah, you bet.
Right, and so I've led units and teams of 120 people in complex missions and complexities. And so when you add that, I also served at the Pentagon at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which has the oversight of all the services. So in terms of being able to address ambiguous uncertainties, and elections are complicated, not that they should be. I'd like them to be less complicated in Ohio, but it does allow for you to understand stakeholders, constraints that the system imposes. You have laws, you have policies, you got procedures, and you got to be able to navigate all that. And in the end, you just want to ensure that people, the only qualified, eligible people are able to vote, and people are able to exercise that civil right.
What are the qualities of a good Secretary of State? And you kind of inferred that a little bit.
Well, I think a good quality of a Secretary of State in any organizational leader is to understand the people that work in those roles and what they face, right? And so you have urban counties, you got rural counties. Not every single election system should be cookie cutter. You know, running an election system in a very low populated county like Monroe County is going to be a lot different than Lorain or Cuyahoga County.
You bet, you bet.
And it's important that we assess the variables, the workforce, the competency, the type of product that we are using. Is that the best product, the most secure product, as well as the process? Are we ensuring that the County Board of Elections have what they need to do their job? And what I've found is that there are some areas that are lacking, and we need to touch that and strengthen those.
Okay. Why do you want to be Secretary of State?
For me, it's deeply personal. You know, I have, before my parents came to this country, they couldn't exercise democracy.
Yeah.
I went overseas to uphold democracy in a sense for Iraq and Afghanis and Iraqis. But I noticed in America, you know, what's happened over the last 20 years is controversies have continually brewed over election systems. And it started in 2000 with the Bush-Gore election, and it's kind of continued, right? And so what concerns me is with each and every cycle, people are rejecting aspects of what's taking place, or they're calling into question more of it. And that has to do, I think, with the lack of transparency and public oversight and accountability. And I think when I saw a statistic in November, near November of 2024 last year, and said that 6 out of 10 Americans going into this last election were having concerns over the degree as to whether they can trust the honesty of the outcome, I knew that we have a national problem. And it doesn't matter whether you're Ohio, California. If our country goes down the route where people have lost trust in elections, Rudy, then they'll be less inclined to defend those outcomes and those results. And so we have to guard against that, right? Because at the end, we have to be able to all walk away from that, accept the outcomes. But things have to be also addressed that are not being addressed right now.
Okay. To get into the weeds a little bit, how many days of early in-person voting should Ohio have, and what would you do to enact changes?
I think as when it comes to voting in person, we should have 1 day. We should have 1 day of voting in person. However, I do believe there are circumstances where people cannot go to the polling location. Okay. And so I do believe in a valid excuse absentee ballot voting system in line with what we currently have, which is 28 days. But I think you have to have a valid reason. You have to be confined, disabled, a medical reason. You're out of the precinct because you're traveling. I believe there are valid circumstances, and they've been in place for many years, until 2006 when we changed to a no excuse mail-in ballot system. And I think that that is highly exploitable to bad actors, and we've seen demonstrated evidence of that already.
Common sense.
Common sense is what my platform for Secretary of State is about.
Yeah. What do you see as the biggest risks and vulnerabilities in Ohio elections? How would you address them?
Well, the biggest risk that I see is the lack of eligibility verification on the front end. So this has nothing to do with voters getting registered. I know there's narratives out there on that with, you know, oh, you're going to make it more difficult to register or somebody can't spell. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with administration. So when it comes to the Board of Elections, they cannot verify identity, residency, or citizenship information. That purview is given to the Secretary of State through a relationship with the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, which is this entity that manages all that official data. I don't see a reason why that official data and authoritative information cannot be pushed down where elections are conducted, and that we give the Board of Elections both the resources and the mandate that they need to do that. And I think as long as we determine everybody's been eligible, we qualify that information for correctness, then I think there's very little room for any bad actors in the system to be able to work. And that's my goal and my objective as a Secretary of State, is to ensure that the Board of Elections have the means to do that and to hold a degree of accountability when they don't.
Okay. What are you prepared to do to support President Trump's stance to end the use of electronic vote casting machines in favor of restoring 100% pre-printed, hand markable and countable paper ballots? And how would you transition Ohio into that system?
Well, pen and paper ballots is already a thing in Ohio. Certain counties choose it. Other counties choose ballot marking devices or touch screens.
Right.
I think the electronic vote casting issue comes down to the fact that the systems themselves haven't been upgraded in the way that to the current threat level that could impact software. Software is vulnerable. I know that from my personal experience in the military trying to protect critical infrastructure. Right. And to be frank with you, Rudy, the voting system vendors haven't innovated enough to catch up to the threat environment. And we're spending tens of millions of dollars. Like I was telling you, some rural counties, they can't afford it. Monroe County paid $63 a vote to be able to vote their ballots last election. That's not acceptable. And so we need a better approach to that. And I think if we were to cast through a pen and paper system, which is what people do when you ask for an absentee ballot request.
Right.
You already do that. Most people can fill in a bubble. You don't need the complexity and the level of auditing you have to do and the logic and accuracy testing that come with that. So we've overcomplicated the election system because we've monetized it. We've made it a business. And I don't really believe in the principle that our elections should be a business, right? First and foremost, they should serve the people, and the people should have the ability to choose the simplest route to be able to cast. Now, I do believe in the idea of using a tabulator to count right now because it's an efficient, it's something that can be auditable. I think we're not doing a good enough job of auditing it, but I also believe that the general population isn't prepared to hand count. And it takes a high degree of training, not complex training, but just for 25 years we've been involved in computerizing the entire voting system. So my approach with that would be is I would afford counties, rural counties in all likelihood, the opportunity to pursue that method if they can attain a 50% ballot referendum initiative, and they could meet a set of strict guidelines that I would set as the Secretary of State, meaning the timeliness, the accuracy, the equal observation of Republicans and Democrats in the process. I would be all for that, but they'd have to meet a high threshold to do that. So I believe in restoring sovereignty to the local counties for means of casting or counting ballots, but I don't believe in pushing it across all 88 counties because, like I was saying, every county is different.
Okay, that's wise. Do you support an outright ban on for-profit or non-profit third-party voter engagement groups conducting registration activities in Ohio?
Yeah, so what I would support in that regard is if it's federally required to be registered at an agency, at a library, using online registration, because we have 100% internet accessibility at this point. We're at a library, you can even do that.
Right.
I would support no involvement, external involvement of anybody for-profit or non-profit in our election system. And we have quite a bit of that. Last year in Ohio, in Hamilton County, a group of canvassers associated with the group out of Cuyahoga actually went ahead and defrauded the registration process. So they figured out how to inject over 140 different false registrations.
Oh boy.
I think that is something that we are only able surface level to detect, and I don't think we need to add that degree of risk or issues in the system. I would prefer that it be done by authorities that are officially prescribed to be involved in that process, and I would work toward that end.
Okay, I think you kind of answered this one. What are you prepared to do to end third-party election interference in Ohio's election
Well, it has to
system?
be worked with the legislature, but the Secretary of State plays an outsized role in working with the legislature.
Okay.
And I think it should start with oversight. Some states have used civil penalties and fines for those that have perpetrated that type of defrauding activity. But I think we're just allowing that level of risk in the system. And what is the benefit in the sense that you have 90% plus registration rates already. So it's not like people are not in a position to be able to register to vote. We have to also look at this like voting is a personal and civic responsibility. We got away from that because we've started to talk a lot, Rudy, about ballot accessibility and voter convenience. My personal view in the campaign that I'm running is I don't discount ballot accessibility or voter convenience. Those are very important components for people who live lives with varied circumstances. But what I do emphasize, and what there's not enough emphasis on, is security and voter eligibility verification. And until we prioritize those two, then we can't have a conversation later about how do we make this as accommodative as possible. And right now we have a big imbalance. You know, voting is two sides of a coin. On one side, you don't want to disenfranchise somebody's right to cast that ballot, which gets a lot of attention, especially from the politicians and the media.
Right.
But what gets less attention, and what I'm trying to balance and emphasize, is the other side of the coin, which is you don't want to dilute somebody's vote, right? You want their ability to not lose their ability to have their voice heard because somebody who wasn't eligible or the process failed to ensure that that person was properly verified. So you've got to actually balance both of those to be able to have a system where everybody can have confidence.
Okay. What will you do to restore implementation of current Ohio law to close primaries to political party affiliated voting only?
Yeah, what's going on right now is that our primaries are an open primary where anybody who wants to cast a ballot for a Republican or Independent or Democrat can ask for that election day. And on the surface, you say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, we have a general election where anybody regarding whatever party affiliation can cast, but primaries are for their parties, right? And I believe in that integrity of that. So I would implement what is already Ohio law, but it's been discounted in the last couple administrations, and I would start the process of making sure that the primaries stay for the party system, because those are the folks that have affiliated and registered. And then the general, of course, we would encourage, of course, all people who want to participate regardless of what candidate.
Okay. What would you do differently than the current Secretary of State?
Well, I would work much more closer with the rural counties. You know, we just had a situation, unfortunately, where they collected over several hundred signatures to get on a ballot referendum to hand count. And they just wanted to see if they could get 50% of their county to say yes. That wasn't even binding or wasn't anything. But the Secretary of State did issue an advisory, which was taken up by county prosecutors, to say that they're not allowed to put that ballot referendum. And I think that's wrong. I think that's stifling democracy and a constitutional right to bring it on a referendum. You didn't have to make it binding. So instead of looking at that in a way as to be in opposition to it, I would look for ways to work with some of those rural counties, like I said, who are financially in distress. They don't have the means to be able to purchase that level of electronic computing system for voting, and they want to go back to something that's more civically involved. And we should be encouraging that, because no matter what county you talk to, there's a challenge on finding poll workers and finding people who want to participate on election day. And it seems to be getting harder and harder. So when you do this and you get, let's say, several hundred people in 2 rural counties that say, we want to participate, and you shun them and you shut them down, do you think they're going to want to be poll workers or poll observers? And this is the problem. I think it's a big disconnect between the way Columbus sees this and wanting to just create this central order over everything, and then just using the organizational leadership and building collaboration with those counties so we can figure out a way to get them on a path to doing that. And I think I've got experience from my time in the military working with different organizations to do those type of projects.
The Secretary of State's budget has risen 325% since 2018. It went from 18 million to 65 million. What areas of the budget would you seek to reduce to bring it in line with historical norms, and why?
Well, first and foremost, if we proceed with the approach that I was talking about with pen and paper ballots, that's potentially tens of millions of dollars right there. I know there's $12 million locked up in critical infrastructure bond just to maintain electronic vote casting machines.
Right.
And so what's happened is a lot of line workers at the Board of Elections, they get paid $13, $14, $15, maybe $16. They struggle to retain those employees, but the deputy directors and the directors get paid 6-digit figures. So if we can create a system that's, I'm going to use this term, I know it's loaded these days, equitable in that sense, right? But I want equality, but in terms of what we're equitable, we would be able to take some of what we're spending doing cyber security, right, which is tens of millions of dollars, but you can't secure something from a 2005 standard perspective, which is what those voting systems are certified to for security. So for me, it's an excessive amount to grow a budget 325% in 6 years.
You bet.
And we need to recalibrate that. And I will tell you that a good part of that budget is business services administration. Now, licensing and incorporating businesses in Ohio brings in millions of dollars to the Secretary of State's office. And if you look at that office historically, what John Husted's administration did is much of that income that was generated from business licenses was used to pay for the election administration in our state, which means we're not double tapping the Ohio taxpayer, which is already reeling, and which is why we see a property tax abolition amendment down the line and that kind of thing. You know, we've got to all start looking at ways to us reassess our priorities of spending. It's not a revenue problem. I say it all the time. It's not necessarily a revenue problem. We have to look at it. Not everything can be spending somebody else's money. And that's the same thing with the election system.
Okay. What would you do to deter or stop out-of-state illegal voting?
I have a simple solution in that regard. I think what we need to do is there are people that do live outside of Ohio, and they should be allowed to retain their residency and continue to vote in Ohio. Just because they left the state doesn't mean they're not a resident or that they don't maintain it. I think the distinction we should have is that a driver's license or a state ID, if you leave Ohio and you surrender that, which you're required to do if you move to another state, that should be the basis of you losing your residency. And if we were to enact just that simple change, meaning if I moved to Indiana and I gave up and surrendered my driver's license for an Indiana driver's license, well, that means, in essence, that I've given up and paid $150 to become a resident of Indiana. That, in turn, should be the basis by which voter rolls are managed and cleaned. So by enacting the Surrender Driver's License Initiative and ensuring that the County Board of Elections know that one of their residents gave their license up, and checking that on a monthly, weekly, whatever timeline we want to set, we would be in a position to eliminate, if not outright deter, double state voting. And we have to, because nationally speaking, we don't have 50 states agreeing right now that they're willing to share information with each other. I know that sounds preposterous, but that's the reality. So why hasn't somebody thought about this? Why hasn't somebody enacted this? This isn't hard stuff.
Marcell, that's simple and common sense.
I'm open.
Okay. Would you change the current arrangement where the Secretary of State handles and directs voter roll record removal on behalf of the counties, or would you permit the 88 boards of county boards of elections to assume primary responsibility for conducting voter record removal more than once a year?
I think it all has to be at the County Board of Election level. That's the area that we're have the most responsibility and oversight for. So, Rudy, from my perspective, we need to flip the script, right? We do this annual voter list maintenance at the Secretary of State's office, which is good, and you're required to do that by law, federal law, by the way. However, you get to within 5 months of an election, and that's when you get a lot of these sketchy issues with registration and the flooding of it the last minute, and then there's no voter list maintenance being done. So we need to actually do it more frequently. We need to do it in the very beginning by qualifying eligibility at the County Board of Elections, and we need to give the County Board of Elections the mandate and, again, implementation of that, and really use the Secretary of State's office more like from a standpoint of accountability and organizational oversight versus making them the central node of managing all of this, because then you create a single point of failure.
Again, simple and smart.
Right, like business.
True. Why do you think the general public has lost confidence in the integrity of the election process? What would you do differently in terms of action and messaging to reverse that trend?
Well, people start not to trust what they can't see and know. And we've been almost gaslighted over time and told these slogans that things are good, trust us, but we're not a trust not verify people. We're a trust and verify kind of people. And so when you put everything behind the computerized system and you give it to the vendor, and the vendor has the total control when you look at it, the political parties that are overseeing this have the control, right? Because they're the ones that are identifying the people who will be counting the ballots. Where's the role for the people? You know, if you go back 25 years, maybe my first election, maybe the last one, there was a time you could actually have citizens identified and trained to count ballots at polling locations. And you'd get the results on election night. And those results would be something that people would have a degree of pride in because they delivered that result for that precinct. And so people took a point of pride in that, people participated in that, and you had every single means when you did it that way to have 100% auditability. Today, the best that we can produce with computerized voting systems is less than 5% of all of a county's ballots get audited. And when you think about the size of a Cuyahoga County with 1 million registered voters, and you're taking less than 5% of that county, and you're just choosing 3 random precincts, and Cuyahoga has hundreds of precincts, okay? And you're basically basing that off of a statistical data point that says that if the machine comes back and recounts this and it says 99.995%, it's good, then what you're doing is you're playing with statistics. Because at the end of the day, it's not just your statistical accuracy of what your audit is. I say it all the time, it's your sample size. And if you don't have statistical accuracy and you don't have, and look, I'm not an expert on statistics, but I did take it in college, right?
Yeah.
You got your P95 interval, right? And so at the end of the day, you got to have sample size. So why not afford some of the counties the opportunity to demonstrate that they can do that? And I think the more you do that, the more people will have confidence in the system. It's really about transparency and public oversight. Don't give the people a reason to question it. Give them the access, not after the fact, but before.
Okay, change gears a little. Should illegal immigration be tolerated?
No, I don't think so in a nation of laws. I mean, we can treat people with humanity on a number of fronts. We understand, and my parents were legal immigrants who waited 8 years for their green card, you know, and that was a very big point of pride to be able to finally earn the right to vote. But if you look at just the practice of other nations in the world, nobody's approaching this issue of immigration in as feckless way as we are. We're introducing all kinds of emotional outbursts about this when we should just look at it plain and simply through the perspective of the law. There is a path to citizenship for people who come into this country through a legal point of entry. In fact, Rudy, 2 million people are legally christened to be residents and or citizens every year. We have still the most generous immigration policy, and we benefit significantly from people who come here with skill sets. But when you have a completely separate approach where we can accept anyone just coming in because they want to come in, and we're going to ignore aspects of the law because, you know, it's beneficial for some groups or nonprofits to benefit from that, then you're not going to create a society that's going to coalesce around immigrants. You're going to create a society that divides around immigrants. And so we've got to stop that issue and just go back to following the law.
Okay. What is your position on the Second Amendment and how it should be protected in Ohio?
It's enshrined. I think it's very important that people have the ability to defend themselves. You can't defend freedom of speech or freedom of religion if you just look at history. You just look at countries that gave up their arms, right? And at times their governments did come in that were authoritarian and that imposed themselves on people. And so I think it's as essential as freedom of speech. There's no freedom of speech if there isn't a 2A requirement. With that said, we've got to exercise laws to ensure that anybody who violates that is not in a position that, you know, is going to, if you will, continue with the ownership of it. But I mean, people are law-abiding. I don't see the problem of guns coming from law-abiding citizens. I'm a law-abiding gun owner. I look at guns as a means of self-defense. Other people look at it for recreation. It's important for us to have that ability. Some people even survive and hunt for their families on this. And it's really difficult for people who live in urban environments to understand that, but the vast majority of the country is wide open. And it's a big part of the culture. And I don't believe in the narratives that they kill people. I think people using guns, using vehicles, using blunt instruments kill people. So I'm a big defender of the ability to own that if you're a law-abiding citizen.
Okay, yeah. How are you campaigning now?
I'm campaigning by going everywhere, 20 different counties thus far. I'm getting around, I'm talking to different groups. I'm enjoying this aspect of interacting. I like to engage with people. You know, public service is that. You are really, I am auditioning and job interviewing for the people of Ohio. I'm bringing in a new generation too, right? I'm 43 years old. I think it's time that we turn the leaf on some of that. We bring in younger folks with a perspective on technology and different things. I come from a different set of mores, but I am rooted in the knowledge and the wisdom that, you know, comes from the prior generations, and I'm ready to carry that forward as a America First conservative candidate.
How can Ohioans help your campaign efforts? Do you need volunteers?
Well, certainly, yeah. If they wouldn't mind going to my website at sturbichforohio.com, we have a website with our policy positions there,
Okay.
which is something that they can get the word out through family and friends. Of course, we are looking to build our financial support. We leapt forward in that regard. In the first 6 weeks, we raised $200,000, and so we
Wow.
jumped right away into an area of viability. But we've got to keep it up. The one thing with political outsiders trying to run in the system is nobody's going to roll out the red carpet for me, right? The people who are running have habitual relationships, and there's agreements that have been made. And I will say there's a fair amount of people that still believe in a system that kind of passes it along to people that they know and that are somebody they like and respect. But I think that's why the decision needs to be with the people of Ohio. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The political parties need to allow the people of Ohio to decide their primary candidates. They should refrain from any type of endorsement. So I'm not seeking the Republican Party's endorsement. All I want is a fair, level-headed race where I can compete on ideas, and I know that I have many of them, and they're supported.
Okay, well, your email address will appear on the bottom of the screen, and I think also the website. And I ask this of every interviewee, in summary, what makes sense to you and what doesn't?
Well, that's a situational question. What makes sense? What makes sense is when we come together as a people and we work toward a common cause. I'm in this race because I want to enact positive change. I don't need this job. I don't need a political career. That's what makes me unique. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. I've already had a very distinguished career. I wouldn't change it for a minute, no matter all the things that I had to endure. I'm a husband. I'm a father of 3 children, 2, 6, and 8. In the end of the day, it's a sacrifice, right? And we should still want people to come into public service to sacrifice. And I don't see it as a stepping stone job. I think it's actually a challenging assignment, but I'm a person that relishes a challenge. And if it's hard or it's complicated, I want to try to get at it. And I think that's the type of people the people of Ohio would like to see. And we're at the cusp of making some generational changes in terms of who's going to come into office here.
Okay, well, the people of Ohio should be grateful that a man of your quality and background and commitment to the armed forces for the United States, it's wonderful that you're running for office, and you have my full support.
Thank you, Rudy. I appreciate this opportunity. It was a great interview. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marcell. And thank you all for watching. Please give us feedback on the show. If you have any questions, our emails will appear on the bottom of the screen. If you would like to be on the show, or you know an interesting person who you think would want to be on the show, please send us their contact information and we'll take it from there. And remember, seatbelts save lives.